comedians and our current political climate. And generally speaking, as you know, that comedians have treated Donald Trump as the villain, with one exception. Back in September, Trump appeared on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. And Fallon's a friendly guy, and the tone of the interview was friendly. And the highlight of the interview, the thing was when Fallon asked Trump if he could mess up his hair. Because Trump's hair is kind of famous, and they did, and they were laughing. And this is what Flanagan writes about that moment. She says, Trump's appearance with Fallon may mark a moment in our national story. It was the last fleeting glimmer of anything approaching goodwill, and possibly of anything deserving it, between political factions. Since then, it's been a race to the bottom, as the crudeness of the president is matched by that of the resistance, with all of us being judged by how well, how thoroughly, and consistently, and elaborately we can hate each other. Nothing about this time is elevating. It's just all of us, on the left and on the right, sworn to our bitterness and anger. I think that sums up pretty well where things stand right now. Bitterness and anger. Politics is making us go crazy. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm the pastor of Holy Trinity Church Northside, which speaks in this building. And since the election in November, I've noticed among the people in the congregation an anxiety about politics and our country. But it's the kind of anxiety where people are kind of afraid to talk about it because I don't know who you voted for, and maybe your political views are different than mine, but it's such a poisonous atmosphere that we can't have friendly conversations about it. We're afraid to even talk about it, and it's making us go crazy. That's the vibe of my church, and it's kind of the genesis for this event. And obviously, it's not just my church where people are anxious about this. So my goal tonight is to give you what I hope will be some helpful points in navigating through this weird political moment that we're in. And I hope it'll be helpful no matter whether you're liberal or conservative or somewhere in between. Just so you know, I have no personal involvement in politics other than as a voter. I don't have a degree in political science, so I'm not an expert by any means. And what I'm going to say to you is basically what smarter people than me have said. And also, this is a lecture, not a sermon. If you want a sermon, I've got plenty of those on Sundays where I stand up there because I'm cool like that. But this isn't that. And also, as best as I can, I'm going to be as politically neutral as I can be. I obviously have political beliefs, but what I'm going to say is, what I'm not going to say is that the answer to all of our problems is just to vote my way. So I hope this will be helpful. And if not, the music was fun. And there are cookies downstairs, so it won't be a total waste. So then, thinking sanely about politics in an insane world, or maybe staying sane in a politically insane world. Here's my argument, and then afterwards we'll have some Q&A, which is when I'll really expose my amateurism. But here's my argument, that if you want to think sanely about politics, do these two things. First, be humble or cultivate a humility about your own political views. And second, don't make politics your religion. Unfortunately, I don't have time to talk about the second one tonight, about not making politics your religion. So mainly, I'm going to argue that you should cultivate a humility about your own political views. And that'll help you stay sane, at least think more sanely in this politically insane moment. That's my argument, and I'll get to it in a moment. First, though, I want to talk about why this political moment feels so insane. I think there are a lot of reasons. I think there are at least two reasons for that. The obvious one is the personalities involved. Let's say the obvious that the president is who he is. He's got a Twitter account, and maybe for you this is the thing making you crazy. But you can't really do anything about that. I mean, you can't change it. Another reason, though, I think we're going insane is more demographic. And maybe this is something that you can change, or at least a little bit, just be aware of. So Americans are much less likely to live near and have closer relationships with people who are different from yourselves. So different economically, different politically. So David Graham writes, Americans are in the midst of what's been called the big sort, as they flock together with people who share similar socioeconomic profiles and politics. In general, this means that rural areas are becoming more conservative and cities more liberal. So the same goes for your social media. So the politics expressed on your Facebook and Twitter feeds are probably just a mirror image of what you already believe. Unless you're Facebook friends with your crazy Uncle Joe who posts all kinds of crazy stuff, but he's your crazy uncle, and he confirms what you already know is wrong about the other side. But otherwise, your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers are probably people who think closely to you. Statistically speaking, you probably have less close relationships with people different from you than people did in previous generations. And if you don't have those close relationships with people of a different political or cultural stripe, then it's a lot easier to demonize them. So if I don't know you from Adam, and I see your bumper sticker or the sign in your yard that expresses everything I think is wrong with the world, it's pretty easy to think that you're a terrible person. But if I did know you, I might understand where you're coming from, and even if I disagree with you, and even if I still thought you were wrong, you're still my friend, and I'm not going to hate you for it. But we don't have as many of those kinds of friendships and relationships, and I think it's making us go crazy a little bit. So this political movement feels insane because, maybe among a lot of other reasons, the personalities involved, and because it's easier and easier to demonize people on the other side, people we don't know. So how can we think more sanely? Even if we can't do anything about if it change politics at the national level or the state level, which reminds me, if you're an Illinois resident, you have extra reason to be insane. But even if you can't change something you can't control, other than voting in a few years, how can you at least bring some more sanity to your own life? Well, I think one way to do that is by cultivating more humility about your own political beliefs. Jonathan Haidt, a professor of psychology at NYU, has a really good book called The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Religion and Politics. Haidt says in his introduction, I could have titled this book The Moral Mind to convey the sense that the human mind is designed to do morality just as it's designed to do language, sexuality, music, and many other things. But I chose the title The Righteous Mind to convey the sense that human nature is not just intrinsically moral, it's also intrinsically moralistic, critical, and judgmental. In other words, Haidt says that human beings are wired both for righteousness and for self-righteousness. So we're wired with a moral sense, a desire for justice and love and all that, but we're also wired for self-righteousness, to see other people's moral judgments in the worst possible light, and to constantly deceive ourselves about our own moral feelings. Now, Haidt is an atheist, and he's politically on the left, and he's making his case from evolutionary psychology. So he says that human evolution it accounts for our righteousness and self-righteousness. But if you take a different view for why human beings are the way that they are, and you might disagree with how it gets there, you might still agree with what he says when he gets there. That at our core, we are inclined to be righteous, to do the right thing, or at least to desire to do the right thing. But we're also inclined to be self-righteous, to pat ourselves on the back for how righteous we are, and to do a monkey no see to our own failings to be righteous, but to see every single one of the failings of people in different camps than we are. And that's why, when it comes to politics, we have this way of saying that people on my side are reasonable and moral, and the people on the other side are unreasonable and immoral. And of course, the people on that side are saying the same thing in reverse, that they're reasonable and moral, and you're the one who's unreasonable and immoral. So we're wired to be righteous and self-righteous, to be moral and moralistic. And that's why you got to be humble about your own politics, to hold out the possibility that you might be wrong sometimes. So what I want to do now is to take a look at 2 points on the political spectrum, 2 ideologies, you could say, and to give a sympathetic portrayal of each one, but also to give some of the more important criticisms of those ideologies. So we're going to look at liberalism and conservatism. I want to look at socialism and nationalism too, but we don't have time for those, unfortunately. And if you're an anarchist or a monarchist, my apologies for leaving you out. But probably most of you here would put yourself in one of those categories. You're liberal or conservative, or if you don't fit neatly into one category or another, which maybe most of us don't, you're going to at least plot yourself on the map in reference to those points, right? And of course, we should acknowledge, as Jonathan Haidt says, that when it comes to voting, that we're actually much more groupish than we are ideological. That ideologies play second fiddle to our groups. So in this current political season, the Republican president does not seem to be particularly conservative in the ways that I'm going to define conservatism. But conservatives voted for him anyway. But still, that being said, ideologies are important, and groups do attach themselves to ideologies, even if those ideologies change over time. So let's give it a shot. And what I'll ask of you is that when I describe a viewpoint that's not your own, to give it a sympathetic hearing, so that you can say, you know what, okay, I don't agree with that, but at least I know that most people who believe that aren't motivated by pure evil. And then when I do describe your viewpoint, and I give some criticisms of it, then I'll ask you to receive those criticisms in a spirit of humility. And even if you have very good ways of responding to those criticisms, you can still say, okay, even though I still think I'm right, I get how people think I'm wrong. In other words, I'm asking you to cultivate a spirit of humility in your own politics by understanding where other people are coming from. So let's start with liberalism. Liberalism is kind of a hard ideology to talk about because most people in Western culture are liberal in some sense, even if you reject that label. So here's what I mean. And by the way, I'm leaning heavily on a book by David Koyzis, if I said his name rightly. It's called Political Visions and Illusions. Koyzis is Canadian, and the book came out about a dozen years ago, something like that. And so I'm going to be leaning on him a lot. But anyway, here's a definition of liberalism. Koyzis writes, thus the first and most basic principle of liberalism runs as follows. Everyone possesses property in their own person and must therefore be free to govern themselves in accordance with their own choices, provided that these choices do not infringe on the equal right of others to do the same. So in other words, you can say that if you're a liberal, the deepest conviction that holds up everything else you believe politically is the sovereignty of the individual. So the sovereignty of the individual. And I think we all should be thankful for liberalism. So our Bill of Rights, which I hope we all treasure, is a list of ways that the individual has sovereign authority over his or her speech and religious practice and so forth. The Bill of Rights is a very liberal document, and it's a good thing, right? We should also be thankful for liberalism's desire to see individual rights extended to all individuals, especially minorities. So that racial minorities have these rights, that women have these rights. That's a good thing. But there are some criticisms of liberalism. One is that it elevates the individual against the community with negative consequences both for communities and individuals. So take pornography, right? So liberalism would say that as long as no one's harmed by it, then the individual should be free to engage or not with pornography. But there's a cost to this freedom. Just this past week in The Independent, which is a left-leaning newspaper in the UK, there's an article titled, Young Japanese People Are Not Having Sex. The article says that one woman, when asked why they think 64% of people in the same age group are not in relationships, said she thought men, quote, cannot be bothered, end quote, to ask the opposite sex on dates because it was easier to watch internet porn. But if people aren't having sex, they're not having babies, which means that Japan is facing a, quote, demographic time bomb. It's going to be a disaster for their economy and everything that's tied to the economy. So, what I'm saying is the expression of individual freedoms isn't always an unqualified good. Another criticism of liberalism is that it inevitably cedes too much authority to the government at the cost of individual freedom. So, if we all should be free to make our own choices as long as we don't infringe upon someone else's ability to make their own choices, then someone has to play the umpire, right? And the umpire is government, and usually the federal government. But what's happened is that the umpire gets bigger and bigger in order to police more and more people and rights. So liberals are usually known as being big government people, whereas conservatives are usually known as being small government people. And the bigger government gets, the more likely it is to impinge upon your individual freedoms. So to give you one example, my family is a homeschooling family. We're weird like that, I know. But we have the political conviction that family, and this is one time where I'm expressing my political views, sorry. So we have the political conviction that that families should have the right to determine their own children's educational paths. Maybe that's stupid and misguided, but that's what we think. And thankfully for us, both the U.S. and Illinois governments are very hands-off with homeschoolers. We send in a notice to Springfield once a year saying that we're homeschooling the kids, and they say, cool. And that's it. And I love it, but not all liberal countries are like that. And again, I could be off my rocker, maybe I shouldn't have any say in how my kids get educated, but at the very least, by definition, for me not to have that right, it would be a loss of individual freedom at the hands of a big government. One more criticism of liberalism, don't go to conservatism, is that it's not consistent with which individual freedoms it tries to protect. This is coming from conservatives, so try to hear this sympathetically. So that it's more concerned with protecting the liberties that liberals like rather than the liberties that conservatives like. And the big one most people talk about is religious liberty. As statistically speaking, liberals are less likely to be traditionally religious than conservatives. And it seems to some people that liberals are not as concerned with protecting religious liberty because they're not all that religious. So liberals would say that religious people should have the right to worship however they want. But they also tend to say that religious activity has no place, or at least limited place, in the public square, because then you'd be infringing on other people's liberties. To take the example of France, liberty, fraternity, what's the third one? Good quality, yeah. They literally built the Statue of Liberty, right? So that's France, where Muslim girls can't wear the hijab in public schools. And the same goes for wearing Christian and Jewish symbols, but really it's the hijab that gets the attention. So if your deeply held religious beliefs include what you wear in public, so for someone to say that you can't wear that is to say that you don't have the personal liberty in this particular area, right? And so whether or not that's right or wrong, it's still a denial of individual freedom, which some would say is inconsistent with the fundamental principle of liberalism. So that's liberalism. Let's go to the other side, conservatism. So if liberalism holds to the sovereignty of the individual, conservatism is looking to history for a source of norms. So looking to history for a source of norms. David Koyzis, again, he says, to conserve something means to keep it, to maintain it, in the face of forces that might tend to eliminate it over time. A conservative has a heightened sense that with change of any sort comes inevitable loss, often the loss of something good which cannot be replaced. This means that tradition has a high value. It's the inherited wisdom of people who came before you. And in essence, we're all conservatives in some sense, right? So we don't reinvent ourselves every morning when we get, so all of us want to conserve something, some traditions, whether or not we call ourselves conservative. Community is really important for conservatives, at least in theory, if not always in practice, because community is the repository of tradition, as Koyzis puts it. Now, conservatives, being small government people, very much believe what the founding fathers believed about the capacity for powerful people for tyranny. That they're very skeptical of people on high always doing the right thing, and therefore there should be constraints on that power. And along those lines, conservatives are very liberal in the sense that they feel that the government should not infringe on their individual freedom, especially economic freedom. So if you're liberal and you think conservatives are crazy, you should at least acknowledge that in some ways you're closer to each other than you might think. You each think there are individual liberties worth protecting. You just might disagree on which liberties or how to protect them or protect them from what. Now, there are, of course, some criticisms of conservatism. One is more intellectual, and it's that it arbitrarily chooses which traditions to conserve. So conserving 1950s style economic and foreign policy in the U.S., kind of conserving the Eisenhower years, that's conservative, right? But conserving the Maoist communist revolution in China against the liberalizing forces of capitalism is also a type of conservatism. So why would one tradition, Eisenhowerism, be worth conserving and not the other, and Maoism, right? So conservatism doesn't seem to have the inner framework to make that kind of moral judgment. What tradition are you conserving? Another criticism is kind of the mirror image of the individual community thing. So it's that communities can be agents of repression and injustice to people who don't fit in the community, right? And along those lines, another criticism is that conservatism's desire to honor tradition has a way of turning a blind eye to the evils in that tradition. So I'm from Alabama. I may not sound like I am, but I am. So I'm from conservative land, which in my estimation has not adequately dealt with the greatest atrocity in our tradition, slavery. So even in my family, who I don't think are evil racists, there's still tendencies to downplay or deflect the significance of slavery in the South and the Civil War. So no one will say slavery was good, apart from the crackpots. But no one reasonable like you would say that. But when you talk about it with reasonable people who I don't think are any more racist than Chicagoans, they'll be quick to say things like, well, the North had children working in factories, and that's bad too. Or there weren't slaves in my family. Or the Civil War wasn't really about slavery anyway, which is historical whitewashing if it ever was such a thing. In other words, conservatives can have a hard time saying, there are some things in my tradition which are so horrendously evil that not only are they not worth conserving, but they're worth repudiating as strongly as possible. Conservatives can have a hard time saying that. It's that whole self-righteous thing, blinding you to your own fault, I think. So, wherever you fall on the political map, I want to appeal to you to be humble about your own politics, that to realize that each side is fueled by similar righteous and self-righteous impulses, and that most Trump voters or most Clinton voters, depending on where you fall, to know that they're probably motivated by something other than pure stupidity or pure evil. I have no confidence that the politicians are going to do that, but maybe you can. So that's my argument. But what if, at the end of the day, the big reason you're going insane is because of the person at the top? Well, the Bible actually addresses that situation, and I'm going to preach about that this coming Sunday here in this space in our 10:30 service. And if you're not doing anything, love to see you there. I've yacked enough. We'll turn it over to Q&A now. I think we're going to set up a mic somewhere around here.